Good evening. This is Dr. Steve Pieczenik on Steve Pieczenik Talks. This evening, the title of my speech is entitled the following: Ne plus ultra, N-E-P-L-U-S, ultra, of political corruption and business incompetence. Al Gore, ex-vice president, ex-senator, presently business charlatan. Just as we think that one sociopathic politician retires from the public eye, then thanks to their insatiable desire for recognition, these sociopathic politicians reappear like cockroaches after a nuclear disaster. I wish there was a way that we could kill off these corrupt politicians, but for now, I must just have to wait and pray. But our cherubic-faced, poorly intellectual Falstaff, former Vice President Al Gore, Senator Al Gore, has been true to form in my expectations. I must say, my dear friends, that I have met him and his family on several different occasions over 20 years, and quite frankly, he has always impressed me as a genetic crossbreed between a donkey, a mule, and a horse's ass. Now trust me, I know this is not genetically possible, at least not yet. But if it were genetically possible, it would describe in part the arrogance, the insolence of this man whom Bush Jr. was able to defeat in a debate. Thanks not to Bush Jr.'s intelligence, but thanks to Gore's inability to restrain his own intellectual aggressiveness and arrogance. He thought he was smarter than anyone in the room, and Bush Jr. was able to use that as a psychological trap. How do I know? In part, I helped prepare the debates for Bush Jr. through an intermediary, whom I will not describe. Now, even the liberal New York Times has once again written a devastating article, this time by Brian Stelter, S-T-E-L-T-E-R, and I strongly recommend you read it, about this liberal intellectual crook who literally intimidated his way into selling a non-revenue, puny, New York Times word, not mine, puny, P-U-N-Y, current TV entity to Al Jazeera, a Qatari-based company. Now, what makes this offensive to us, the American taxpayer, is not only the arrogance and just the absolute corruption of this intimidation by Al Gore to the various people involved, but more importantly, that he utilized our free airwaves, for which he and his colleagues paid very little money, to establish a really non-existent cable TV system called Current TV that had neither ratings nor content nor revenue. But the story gets worse. Remember, these are our airwaves, the American airwaves, that we sold, rented, or leased to our former crooked and present crooked politicians. The sale of a non-existent business is not new. The Carlyle Group of Washington, D.C. has done that repeatedly, selling military contracts and companies to the Defense Department. Recently, Meg Whitman, the chairman of Hewlett-Packard, bought $8.4 billion company, which she claimed had no assets and was replete with accounting frauds, and which she had 4 different accounting companies, unable to explain how she acquired a non-company or fraudulent company. But Al Gore makes Bush Jr. look like J.P. Morgan and Carnegie combined. You see, my dear listeners, the fact that Al had not one experience as a businessman running his own business and still earned $100 million for himself for a sale in which he literally, quote, intimidated, end quote, all the parties. That's the New York Times version, and it's even the version of the parties involved. Intimidated is par for the American political course. Forget about honesty. Forget about hard work. Employees don't even mention the Puritan ethic. That's way beyond passé. And for you and me, the poor jerks out here, and myself and out there, who believe in meritocracy, discipline, honesty, and transparency, we are truly the American suckers. Why? Look at Slick Willie, our president 30 years ago. This boy, Slick Willie Clinton, believe me, has no sense the word is he a man, earned a very couple of $100 million from guess who? Yep, the Qataris once again, and Dubai, which gave him money in part for soliciting his reputation on behalf of their interests with regards to harbors, investments in the United States and elsewhere. Hey, why do I even waste my time to illustrate how Slick Willie made millions? You get it. He was corrupt. He was born into a corrupt family in a corrupt town, Hope Springs, Arkansas, where all the mafia, the Jewish and the Italian mafia, would get rid of all of their wastrel mobsters and had houses of prostitution and gambling in this little town called Hope Springs in Arkansas. He grew up, Slick Willie, as a drug addict, had a whole history of drug addiction, which Hillary tried to erase, but unfortunately was there. He was pushing drugs and taking drugs and scamming the system. Even, quite frankly, the CIA had to help him out when he got a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University, which he never completed. And one of his roommates was a very distinguished man by the name of Stroll Talbot, the Deputy Secretary of State and the head of Time magazine, whom I knew. And I have nothing more than high praise to talk about Strobe. But in contrast, Slick Willie found himself somewhere in Russia and elsewhere on behalf of our you-know-who, the CIA. But he denies that and makes no mention of it. When he left the presidency, he had no money, but within a few months and a few years, like every other president, he wrote a book, which he claimed he wrote, and received millions of dollars from publishers. But I know publishers. I know them very well, having had successful novels and non-successful novels. And let me say the following. It may sound like a hyperbole, but it's very accurate. If you were Hitler meeting Stalin to discuss the extermination of the entire human race, I guarantee you that all the publishers in New York City would arrange to have someone write their respective love sonnets on behalf of either Hitler or Stalin or together. And then the Hollywood talent agents would represent each one of these men, all populated by minority groups, in order to make a musical on behalf of the love poems of Hitler or Stalin. In short, publishers have no conscience. They have no idea of what they're doing other than to get the words out of those who are well known for whatever reason. So there is no morality within publishing. There is no morality within Hollywood. We know that. But let's get back to Gore. He's one piece of work. He will force your attention on an issue he had discovered by accident. This is not something I found out happenstance. It was told to me by several congressmen who said that Al Gore had had no legislation, no previous interest on an issue that is well known now, global warming and the environment. He was, as they described, a total bullshit artist, but he was able to create a book and create a persona that represented something he had never been either intellectually or legislatively involved with. You see, from childhood, I know a lot about Al Gore. He grew up in Washington, D.C. area. His father was a senator from Tennessee. And then he was nurtured to be in the elite ruling class. And ironically, his cousin or distant cousin was Gore Vidal, a man whom I've had very great respect for, and he in turn had very little respect for Al Gore. But unlike Al Gore, Gore Vidal was a formidable writer, playwright, screenwriter, and commentator who could often make fun of himself and his own family. Unfortunately, Al Gore couldn't make fun of himself because there was very little in him that was either humorous or self-effacing. He went to St. Albans School, a well-known all-male school, where he was destined to come into the elite. Then he went into the military, and guess what? He was sent into the public relations division of the U.S. Army. And that reminds me of that film with Robin Williams called Good Morning, Vietnam, where he was sure there would be no bullets or sharp objects that would ever come near to our American Dalai Lama. He was to return as pristine as he went in order to marry what I have often known and others have known his alcoholic wife I call Tipsy Gore, who volunteered all on her own to do something I could not believe even at the time that I knew them, she invade against the evils of rock and roll. You believe that? She thought that rock and roll would pollute me and the minds, your minds, and she blamed rock and roll on the dissolution of the family and creating miscreants. Now, in my world, I grew up in 108th Street in Amsterdam in what was called Harlem. And I grew up to the tunes, to the only thing I had, which was a radio, to the tunes of Little Richards, Chuck Berry, Frankie Lyman, who was in another school, contemporary of mine. So when you grow up at Booker T. Washington 108th and the only thing you have is rock and roll, you could look askance at somebody like Tipsy Gore or Al Gore and say to yourself, what in God's name are they talking about? Anyway, back to the Al Gore, or I like to call him Baby Goober. Let me quote from the article in the New York Times. Al Gore, current TV was never popular. What he was known for, in the article pointed out, for his personal arm twisting of industry giants. Now, that's extremely important to understand. In other words, he didn't have a talent as a chairman of the department, as a chairman of a group or a business entity. And like all politicians, all he had was a past history of corruption. He was accused of receiving money from the Taiwanese and the Chinese in California. He had been involved in many other occurrences that were slightly off center, but he never admitted to any fraud or any type of miscreant behavior. The most important thing and why I talk about this, and the New York Times even wrote it, was that he had no substance and no experience as a businessman, yet he garnered over $100 million for himself. Is that surprising? No. I'm not spending your time and my time to tell you how political corruption works. What I'm amazed at is how he was able to arm twist somebody like Rupert Murdoch. Now, Rupert Murdoch I have never met, but I have dealt with his company, Fox, and I know Roger Ailes. Rupert Murdoch, I have tracked on behalf of our government since 1989, his business ventures from Perth, Australia, all the way to the United States when he became a citizen. Whatever else you can say about Rupert Murdoch and Fox News and Roger Ailes, one thing I know about Murdoch is he's a formidable businessman, and he's not someone you can intimidate. So when I read in the New York Times that the arm twisting of Rupert Murdoch was involved, I said to myself, this is far greater than anyone realizes, because it involves certain elements of our political dynamic to which Al Gore was specifically privileged to have, i.e. the airwaves and the designation of the TV show or his channel as a news channel. Now, that technicality may not seem great enough, but it was enough to deter Murdoch and the Qataris from either foregoing on their own contracts. The point again here is that it really doesn't worth our while to work hard, to do our own businesses, to pay our own taxes, when in fact we have such corrupt politicians who have never been able to be accountable for their activities in Congress, nor can they be accountable for their activities in the private sector. He was not only a chairman of this department called Channel TV, but he was never a full-time chairman, and this is what got me as well. Boy, does this hurt me. I've been involved in over 28 startups and had to work them 24/7, day in and day out, sick or healthy, from Washington to Montana to everywhere all over the United States and all over the world. And I've lost a lot of money, and maybe 40% of my companies went under. But I paid the price. I had no misgivings about it. I was on the line. I was not a VC. I was not a banker. I was just a simple entrepreneur like many of you are in your own small businesses. But not Al Gore. Not only was he not a full-time chairman of this $500 million company, which was not worth $500 million, but he was also a co-founder of Generation Investment Management. Sounds like a bullshit company of much money and no work to me. And at the same time, while he was not a chairman of this company where he got $100 million, and he was not involved in the investment of Generation Investment Management, at the same time he was an investment partner at the premier venture capital firm of Klein, Perkins, Caulfield, and Byers. Now, I know this firm. I spent a lot of time in Palo Alto. This firm is a major player for most high-tech companies. You cannot go out as a high-tech company in Silicon Valley without the imprimatur of Klein, Perkins, Caulfield, and Byers. And I can assure you they were there long before Al Gore invented the internet, and they will still remain there without Al Gore's investment. So Al Gore had to have been promised a partnership or investment relationship in this prestigious law firm and investment firm as a payoff for his political involvement on the internet and on the Bush Jr. fiasco. Now, this is still not enough because apparently Al Gore is also on the board of Apple. Now, I wonder what this means to you and me when we buy something that Steve Jobs created from nothing. Is there really integrity and accountability in private industry? I don't know. Not only that, but at the same time, not only was he not a chairman, not involved in investment, not a partner in Klein Perkins, really not on the board of Apple, but he was not a chairman. He claimed he was a founder. He found enough time to be chairman of the Climate Reality Project. Whoa. I don't know about you, but I'm already exhausted from his rap sheet. A poor American worker can barely fit in 3 jobs a day to meet his or her minimum financial requirements to stay alive. But Al Gore, what I call Baby Gerber, got his message from Bush Jr. in the Florida elections, with the voting charts, which he claimed were miscalculated and were overridden by our corrupt Supreme Court to determine that Bush Jr. was indeed the winner. The payoff, as I see it, was all these investments in non-entity companies and Silicon Valley startups. That was his reward for bowing down to the corruption of his antagonist, Bush Jr. So once again, we not only have a corrupt politician, but we have a corrupt businessman. And this has to stop. As for me, in my humble point of view, there's only one thing I can say. Desperate affairs require desperate measures. I'm quoting from Lord Horatio Nelson, the one-eyed British naval hero, who said when he defeated the corrupt, destructive, self-anointed Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte, "Long live the king." The king is dead. As we say in French, le roi est mort, vive le roi. And so I bid you good night, farewell, and good luck.